Well, a new report warns that rising sea levels could destroy many of the nation's important and beloved locations. 3 of those historic sites are right here in Maryland. In a 2-part series, I take a look at the state capitol, where not 1, but 2 of those sites are located.
I think this downtown area, especially where this little wall is here, it floods a couple times a year.
This resident is describing flooding problems around the Annapolis area, one of 30 at-risk sites across the nation endangered by climate change. The Union of Concerned Scientists recently released a new report stating that 2 of the sites are located near the state capitol, the downtown harbor area, and the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, the new report says much of the nation's beloved and important historical sites could soon be destroyed due to rising sea levels, including right here at Annapolis Harbor.
Essentially, what we found in landmarks at risk is that national park entities and some historic towns such as Annapolis, where the core is very historic and has some of the largest colonial buildings that are world-renowned, that these are at risk from climate change impacts. And the Park Service and communities such as Annapolis have to take steps to protect and prepare these communities for the climate change that's coming ahead.
Residents say they're already getting used to frequent and intense weather events around the Annapolis area, but are concerned about what rising sea levels could do to their beloved city, its businesses, and its historic artifacts.
I used to work right here at Annapolis Elementary. It's being renovated, and when we would have heavy rains, a lot of times downtown would flood, and it would be very hard to get to work.
Not just when it rains a lot, but when it's a high tide, when it comes in. It floods here where the parking is.
Does it make it difficult to get around?
Oh, well, sometimes it's blocked off that you can't park here.
Well, rising water levels mean more runoff. You know, I'm not an ecologist, but for the little I know is the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay is vast and widespread. So people do things up north, and a lot of runoff and a lot of rising water brings all the dirt and the waste and stuff down into the Chesapeake Bay.
How would that affect your kayaking business?
Well, if people paddle by and they see trash and dirty water and stuff, they're not going to want to paddle by very often.
Climate change has accelerated the rate of sea level rise. And so a regular old storm in the past coming in on higher seas means it's inundating further and has a higher elevation for some of these historic buildings. And so we aren't even prepared for these regular storms, and we do have to take extra steps to prepare for those bigger storms if, goodness, I hope they don't come, but they may come in the future.
And a third Maryland site that's at risk hasn't even been built yet. The Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park is set to open in January 2016. And in part 2 of my series later this week, we take a look at what the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis is doing to stave off rising sea levels around the base. As we reported yesterday, a new study by the Union of Concerned Scientists warns that climate change could devastate some of the nation's most historic places. Of the 30 at-risk sites, 3 are located in Maryland, and 2 of those are in Annapolis. In part 1 of my series, I discuss potential problems with rising sea levels at Annapolis Harbor. Today, we take a look at how the U.S. Naval Academy is trying to combat the problem.
And so that 20-foot high wall will be a flood barrier.
Sarah Phillips is describing how the military is trying to protect one of its most historic bases, the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. A new report by the Union of Concerned Scientists says it's one of the nation's most at-risk sites for rising sea levels due to climate change. The architect has been working on numerous small projects ever since Tropical Storm Isabel devastated the region in 2003.
Tropical Storm Isabel, we got the brunt of it, and we got the tidal surge that it was associated with that storm. So we had extensive flooding. All of the low-level areas, low-lying areas were flooded, and we had extensive damage from them.
In Annapolis, there was a storm surge of over 6 feet, which was about 2 feet higher than the 100-year flood level for the historic downtown of Annapolis. And the Naval Academy had to spend about $120 million to restore. They put in flood control measures, cisterns, and they have barriers to protect some of the flooding of some of the historic facilities that were in the Navy Yard.
As funding became available, the Navy began working on ways to waterproof the base in case of flooding. Everything from temporary barriers across roads and buildings to placing door dams around low-lying infrastructure.
As that slopes down to the water, that's where we have the problem. And you can
This naval cemetery just across the water is one of the most flood-prone areas. Since most important classrooms and labs are often located on ground floors, Phillips says the Navy is looking at what major projects need to be done.
there are not good ways to protect this land. So you look at, can you allow some of this water to come in and do what it's going to do, especially on some of the athletic fields. That could be okay because you're not going to incur a lot of damage on them on an athletic field. There's not anything there really to rebuild except to returf maybe. What we are mostly interested in is protecting the interior of the buildings and the mission essential capabilities that are inside those buildings.
Luckily, most of the historic buildings are on higher ground, but future projects will have to factor in ways to protect buildings and property from storm surges, perhaps using ground floors for purposes that can withstand possible flooding.
As we do new construction, kind of allowing the ground floor of buildings to be taller than we normally had built, looking at raising electrical equipment and HVAC equipment onto rooftops when we can. So we're doing things very incrementally. I think we're better than we were when we had Hurricane or Tropical Storm Isabel. So I think we're much better than we were. I think we have a long way to go.
And one of the oldest sites threatened by climate change that's listed in the report is just south of Annapolis in Jamestown, Virginia. Jamestown is the first permanent English colony established in America.